I pulled clean clothes from the top shelf and dressed quickly, mechanically, as if I kept moving I wouldn't fall apart. When I was done, I slipped out onto the porch. The night air was cold and sharp. I sat on the step, arms wrapped around myself, watching the driveway and waiting for headlights, counting the minutes until someone came who knew my name and chose me on purpose. I saw Mark's car drive onto the driveway, the dim headlights cutting across the porch like a promise. I didn't hesitate. I crossed the grass wearing my flip-flops and opened the passenger door before Mark could even get out to help me. "Hey," he said softly, taking one look at my face. I climbed in without a word. He leaned over and fastened my seat belt for me, careful, unhurried, like he knew I didn't have the strength to do it myself. His brow was creased with concern, his movements steady in a way that made my chest finally loosen. "You're safe," he said quietly, not as a question. I nodded, staring straight ahead as he pulled away from the house, the weight of it receding in the rearview mirror. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe. We drove east, 5 miles of quiet streets slipping past the windows until the house was far enough away to stop feeling like it was still watching me. Mark had recently moved into a new apartment only a few miles from me, no longer living on the far north side of Los Angeles. The shorter distance made seeing him much easier, and for the first time in a long while, I had someone nearby who felt safe to call when I needed to get away. Mark's new loft was warm and softly lit, the kind of place that felt lived in but not crowded. He set a cappuccino in my hands and waited while I wrapped my fingers around the mug, letting the heat steady me. He didn't ask questions, he didn't rush. When I finally nodded, just once, he came closer and pulled me into a hug. I folded into him and he sat back with me, one arm around my shoulders, the other rubbing slow circles into my back. "It's okay," he said quietly, like it was a fact, not a reassurance he needed me to accept right away. I cried there, face pressed into his shoulder, the sound ugly and uncontained. He held me without tightening, without letting go, letting my weight rest where it needed to. I didn't know how to put the humiliation into words. Every sentence felt too sharp, too exposing. Mark didn't push. He just stayed, breathing steady, anchoring the moment until the tears ran out and the silence didn't feel so dangerous anymore. Whatever I was going to say, whenever I was ready, he made it clear it could wait. "He hurt me," I said, the words breaking apart as I cried into Mark's shoulder. Mark kissed my clammy temple, gentle, protective, the way an older brother might, and held me a little tighter. "I figured," he said softly. I tried to speak and failed, sobbing instead. My chest hitched. He touched me, I didn't ask for it. Mark's hand moved in slow, steady circles on my back. "You didn't want that." I shook my head, the truth messy and awful. "Not like that," he thought I was someone else. Mark went still, then asked carefully, "Emily?" I nodded, crying harder. "Yes, Emily." He exhaled, jaw tight, but his voice stayed calm. "Is Emily his girlfriend?" "Yes, I think so," I whispered. Mark didn't say anything for a moment. He just held me while it landed, how being mistaken for someone else could turn closeness into humiliation, how consent could disappear even without intent. "I'm really sorry," he said at last. "That shouldn't have happened to you." And for the first time since it all fell apart, I believed someone was on my side. "Did Tate sneak into your bedroom?" Mark asked gently, pulling back just enough to look at me. I shook my head hard. "No, we've always slept in the same room since we were kids, sleepovers, it was never strange before." My voice wobbled. "We fought yesterday, he accused me of shutting him out and I said hateful things to him, he wouldn't forgive me unless I slept there in his room." Mark didn't interrupt, he just listened. "So I did," I whispered, "I slept there." He took a breath. "Noah, did Tate sexually assault you?" "No," I said quickly, too loud, the word cracked. I pressed my face into his shoulder again, the truth tangled and painful. I wanted him to touch me like that, to want me, I wanted the closeness, I loved what he did to my body, he thought I was someone else, Noah sniffled. Mark's hand stilled for a second, then resumed its steady motion on my back. "So the issue," he said carefully, "is that you consented to a hand job but didn't consent to being mistaken for a girl. And once you realized that Tate's emotional interest wasn't directed at you, it hurt, you felt used." I nodded, tears soaking through his shirt. He didn't do it to hurt me. I felt invisible, used without being chosen. Mark didn't argue with that. That's real, he said quietly, and it matters. He held me there, firm and calm, not rushing me toward labels or conclusions, just making space for the truth to sit without crushing me. Then why are you so pale? Mark asked quietly. Why are you shaking? I swallowed hard. I got sick, I said, after he said her name. Mark's brow furrowed. I threw up, I admitted. I felt used, humiliated, like I didn't exist. My voice broke. That's why I called you. Mark let out a slow breath, frustration slipping through his calm. That's not okay, Noah. He's an asshole for putting you in that position. You should tell his parents. No, Tate does things when he sleeps. He can't help it. It's just something he started to do for the last year or so, I said, too fast, too loud. The word echoed in the room. I pulled back just enough to look at him. He was asleep. He didn't know he was hurting me. My hands twisted in the fabric of his shirt. If he knew what his hands did, if he knew how my body reacted. The thought made my chest seize. If Tate ever found out or knew I liked him and was gay, he'd throw me away. It would destroy us, I whispered. He'd be disgusted, repulsed, and I don't think I'd survive losing him like that. Mark didn't argue right away. He just studied me, the way someone does when they realize how much fear is holding another person together. Okay, he said finally, softer now, we don't have to decide anything tonight. His hand rested between my shoulder blades, steady and sure. Right now, he said, you're safe, and that's all that matters. Would you kiss me? I asked, the words barely audible. Mark hesitated. Noah, I don't think that would be a good idea. Please, I said, the plea slipping out before I could stop it. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded once. Okay. He kissed me softly, carefully, like I might shatter if he moved too fast. There was no hunger in it, just kindness, patience, consent. The contrast hurt more than I expected. I wished briefly, sharply, that Tate knew how to be this open, this gentle, but Tate was straight as an arrow, and I wasn't. I couldn't hide that from myself anymore. When the kiss ended, my voice shook. Mark, I'm gay. He smiled, small and knowing. I suspected, he said kindly. I'm glad you felt safe enough to tell me. He glanced toward the window, still dark outside. Do you want to sleep for a few hours? Yeah, I said, exhausted. Thank you. I slept until 11, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that only comes after everything finally stops spinning. By noon, Mark drove me back, quiet, steady, no questions I wasn't ready to answer, and for the first time since the night before, I felt like I could breathe again. How's Chris? I asked as we slowed near the house. Mark let out a short laugh. We broke up, the apartment move did us in, and Chris accepted a job in Tokyo starting in 2 weeks. I nodded, watching the familiar trees slide past. Hey, he added, casual but not careless, could I take you out tomorrow, like a date? I surprised myself by answering without hesitation, sure. The car rolled to a stop. I looked up at Tate's house, the porch light still on like it always was, and felt something heavy settle in my chest. I sighed. I'll see you. You too, kid, Mark said gently. He waited until I was out of the car before pulling away. I stood there for a moment, watching his taillights disappear, then climbed the porch steps and let myself inside, back into my second home, carrying a truth I couldn't put down and a future that suddenly felt both terrifying and possible. Hi, honey, Tate's mom said as I stepped into the entryway, my green duffel bag still slung over my shoulder. Where have you been? We missed you at breakfast. Out with Mark, I said, shrugging like it was nothing. She tilted her head, thinking, I haven't met him, have I? No, I said, but soon, maybe. Okay. She smiled easily and leaned in to kiss my forehead, the familiarity of it almost undoing me. As she straightened, her smile softened. Tate was asking about you at breakfast. My chest tightened. I'll check in with him, I said. I took the stairs 2 at a time, every step heavier than the last, heading toward a door I wasn't sure I was ready to open, knowing whatever waited on the other side would not be simple anymore. Tate, I said, knocking lightly on his door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, then once more nothing. I exhaled, gave up, and headed back down the hall. I shut my bedroom door behind me and froze. Tate was sitting on my bed. He didn't look up right away. His elbows were braced on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His shoulders were locked, rigid, like he'd been holding himself still for a long time. The air in the room felt wrong, thick, charged. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were sharp and glassy all at once, anger and jealousy radiating off him in heavy waves. Tate noticed the red athletic jacket on my shoulders, the one from Mark's college, but he didn't say anything. "You couldn't find me," I said quietly. "Where were you this morning?" Tate's voice was calm, too calm, like he already knew the answer, like he'd been waiting for it. I swallowed, unsure how much to admit. "Out, with a friend," I said, my voice carrying that obvious defensive edge. He sat up slightly on the bed, eyes locking on mine. "Were you going fishing or something?" "No," I shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of his gaze. "Why did you leave before 7? Are you just going to answer with 1 or 2 words? Is that what we've boiled down to?" His tone sharpened, teasing at the edge of accusation. "I'm allowed to have friends," I said, my own voice laced with accusation this time. "I never said you couldn't," he shot back, calm but deliberate. "But you've been disappearing a lot lately. Is there something I need to know?" The silence that followed hung heavy, full of unsaid things, suspicion, and that unspoken demand for honesty. My pulse kicked hard. "I couldn't find you this morning," Tate spoke. His jaw tightened. "I know." Silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Whatever had been simmering in him all day had followed me back here, and now it had nowhere left to go. I was woken up early by the sound of a car engine in the driveway. Tate's voice was tight. "One of your guy friends," he said. "Yes," I answered. "I had plans," I said, staring at the floor. He didn't like that. I could feel it in the silence that followed, the way the room seemed to shrink. He stepped closer, too close, and the mattress shifted as he moved. My heart slammed. I backed up until the bed pressed into my knees. "Don't," I said quietly. "One of your guy friends," Tate said, voice tight the second I woke. "Yes," I answered. That was the wrong answer. I stood there, torn between instinct and survival, between the boy I'd loved for years and the life I was trying to step into. "I'm going back downstairs," I said softly. "This conversation isn't helping either of us." He didn't stop me this time, but as I walked away I could feel it. His jealousy wasn't fading, it was settling in, and jealousy like that doesn't disappear quietly. The juice from the kitchen was sharp and sour, and I swallowed it too fast, my throat burning as I hurried back upstairs. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. I could feel him there anyway, the weight of his attention, the way his jealousy clung like static even when he stayed put. He didn't follow me. That almost made it worse. I shut myself in the spare room and turned the lock with deliberate care, the small click sounding louder than it should have in the still house. I stood there for a second, hand resting on the knob, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Tate was still standing outside my door, but I had won the battle for tonight. I climbed back into bed and stared at the ceiling, hoping the knob wouldn't rattle again, hoping I wouldn't wake to his silhouette in the doorway like before. Tate had always been persistent, and for most of my life, no had ever really existed between us. I knew exactly what was eating at him. It wasn't just that Maya was there, it was that she hadn't had to fight for space the way I had. She hadn't negotiated, hadn't yielded, hadn't reshaped herself to keep the peace. She simply existed, and I chose her presence. That felt unbearable to him. He saw it as access, as a replacement, as a loss. But buddies and lovers weren't loved the same way, no matter how much he wanted to pretend they were. What he felt wasn't entitlement to me, it was fear dressed up as jealousy, a refusal to accept that closeness didn't mean ownership. I pressed my face into the pillow and exhaled slowly. I wasn't cruel for wanting privacy, I wasn't betraying him by growing up, and I wasn't responsible for filling the hollow places he refused to face. Down the hall, I knew Tate was awake, counting what he thought he was losing. In my room, with the door locked and my heart racing, I understood something I hadn't before. If I didn't hold this boundary, if I gave in just once to make him feel better, I would never get myself back. The heat had gone out sometime before dawn. By the time I woke up, the room felt like a refrigerator, my breath faintly visible, my fingers stiff no matter how tightly I wrapped the blankets around myself. The thermometer on the wall read 35 degrees, no amount of layering helped. I opened the door to my room and froze. A heavy thud echoed in the quiet hallway and my heart skipped a beat. Something had fallen backward, landing almost on my shoes. "Tate." He'd been propped against my spare room door, a pillow and blanket wrapped around him like some makeshift barricade, as if he were trying to hold the world off. But now his body had slipped, toppling onto the floor in a graceless heap. He didn't wake, arms curled under his head, chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm, completely oblivious to the world around him. The hallway was cold, the kind of early morning chill that seeped into bones. He must have fallen asleep like this, frozen in the hall with no heat, utterly alone. I knelt beside him, my stomach tightening. Leaning down, I pressed my hand to his forehead, then his cheek. It was hard, impossibly cold, frozen solid. My fingers hovered for a moment, reluctant to move, as if touching him could shatter something fragile. I brushed a stray lock of black hair from his face, and it felt brittle under my fingertips. His lips, slightly parted, were blue, pale, and rigid. My heart hammered. Seeing him like this, so unguarded, so helpless, made a strange ache twist through me. Tate, usually untouchable, untiring, the one who held his world together, was suddenly a fragile thing I could almost break with a careless touch. I shifted closer, curling around him instinctively, trying to shield him with my body. My hands pressed harder, hopping for warmth, willing it to seep into him, willing him to wake, to respond. But he remained still, silent except for the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. The air between us felt sharp, almost biting, carrying the faint scent of cold and fabric and sleep. For a moment I just stayed there, holding him like he couldn't move, like the world could not touch him, feeling the helpless weight of how utterly vulnerable he was. The hallway was still, the cold pressing against my skin, and yet all I could feel was him, Tate, frozen, fragile, mine to protect, if only for a moment. Tate would rather freeze to death lying against my door than sleep in his comfortable, warm, temperature-controlled bedroom just down the hall. He didn't want to leave me alone, and since I refused his attentions, platonic as they were, he refused to be satisfied by the empty space down the hall. Every part of his body, curled and rigid against the icy wood, pressed insistently toward me. It was rather sweet, utterly devoted to him, the kind of stubborn loyalty that had earned him the nickname Pepe Le Pew from his mother. But right now, sleeping there, frozen, shivering and cold, he didn't look very happy. His arms were tucked under his head, his chest rising and falling unevenly, his legs stiff and drawn close, and his body shivering against the chill. He was probably dreaming of me, patrolling some imaginary hall in his sleep, slamming a door, locking it in my face, determined to be near me even when unconscious. The contrast was striking. The warmth of his devotion versus the cruel chill of the hallway, the humor of his stubbornness against the reality of how miserable his body was. And yet, even like this, I couldn't help but feel a swell of something soft and protective toward him, my frozen, shivering Tate, whose body refused comfort if it meant being apart from me. I paused for a moment, thinking carefully about how to help Tate without crossing my boundary of sleeping alone. My eyes swept the spare room, and I remembered the small electric heater tucked away in the closet. Quietly I retrieved it, careful not to disturb the quiet of the early morning, and carried it into the hallway. Tate's body, curled and rigid against the icy door, made my chest tighten with a mix of worry and something like helpless protectiveness. I plugged the heater into the wall socket in the hallway, adjusting it slowly, testing the distance so it wouldn't be too close, so his skin wouldn't turn red from sudden warmth. Even small touches of heat felt like a luxury after the cold he had endured all night. I watched him carefully, noticing the stiff curl of his fingers, the slight twitch in his shivering arms, the way his legs were drawn up tightly, unwilling to release even a fraction of their frozen tension. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the harsh blue of his cheeks softened and his lips looked less brittle. The warmth began to seep into him, coaxing his body into something more human, more comfortable. The little heater was a fragile thing compared to the furnace down in the basement, but it was all right. It was enough to cradle him gently, like a small shield against the cold that had gnawed at him all night. I remembered how he had always called me Toasty, teasing, soft, almost affectionate, and now that same warmth could be wrapped around him, his body finally catching a trace of comfort. I stayed there for several minutes, watching the subtle changes, feeling the gentle vibration of the heater under my hand, listening to the soft rise and fall of his chest. Even in sleep, even frozen and shivering, he was stubborn. He wouldn't leave my side, wouldn't retreat to warmth on his own. That stubbornness, once playful and sweet, now felt like a tangible weight pressing on my heart. I let my hand hover over him, almost instinctively, as if I could transfer some of my own body heat into him, some of my own calm, some of my own presence. The hallway was quiet, the cold softened but still present at the edges, and I realized I could do this small thing for him, hold space, provide warmth, make sure he was safe, without breaking my own rules. Minutes passed, the chill in his body slowly yielded to the heater's hum. His fingers, once rigid and pale, relaxed slightly. His arms shifted, settling a little closer to the warmth. The stubborn curve of his legs eased just enough to tell me he was finally letting himself rest, if only for a few more minutes. I could already imagine him waking in a little while, still half dreaming, reaching for breakfast, still grumbling about his frozen feet or the icy door, unaware how close he had come to suffering. For now, though he was safe, his frozen body finally beginning to thaw, wrapped in a small bubble of warmth, attention, and care, the kind of devotion he had always given me now returned. I bit my lip, panic and something else twisting in my stomach. "Tate," I whispered, stepping closer but not wanting to disturb him too much. His hair was mussed, his face half buried in the blanket, and for a split second he looked impossibly vulnerable. Then the familiar possessive tension hit me. He was lying there, asleep, desperate to be near me like some territorial beast, and even unconscious, it was terrifying how much control he had over my life. I swallowed hard and crouched to the side, careful not to step on him. "You're insane," I muttered under my breath, part frustration, part awe. Talia had said he was obsessive and territorial, but seeing it like this, sleeping against my door for hours, unwilling to let me out of his sight, it became real in a way I couldn't ignore. I wanted to help him up, to shake him gently, but I also didn't want to provoke him. What if he woke up groggy and furious at me for being in my room? Finally, I carefully nudged his shoulder with my foot. "Nothing." I leaned closer and whispered again, "Tate, you okay?" Still nothing. My mind raced. He'd done this on purpose. He needed me while I slept, making sure I stayed where he could see me. I felt a weird mix of irritation, fear, and something I didn't want to admit to, relief. No matter how suffocating his obsession could be, it was proof Tate was always there, always watching, always claiming me. I remember last night around 2 a.m. lying half awake on the mattress when I heard a crash, then voices in the hallway. My ears immediately perked up. There was a tense energy I couldn't ignore. One voice, calm but firm, spoke through the dim quiet of the house. "Tate, Romeo, go back to your room, get out of the hallway, now." I froze. Romeo, that's what someone was calling him, teasing him for sleeping outside my door again, for lingering when he wasn't wanted. My chest tightened. Even through the thin walls I could feel the weight of Tate's presence, the desperation that made him linger outside my room night after night. Tate's response came fast, jagged, full of anger and frustration. "Fuck you, leave me alone, I'm not, you're just a guest." His voice cracked, belligerent, as though the insult of being called Romeo ignited every nerve. I could hear Tate packing back and forth outside my door, a flurry of footsteps shuffling across the hallway. Then came a sound that made me wince. A light trip over something, a clatter of feet as whoever had dared to speak to him stumbled slightly and retreated down the hall toward the bathroom. The faint rattle of a doorknob reached Noah first, subtle but wrong in the fragile quiet of the early morning. It pulled him halfway out of sleep, his body going still as his mind tried to place the sound. The metal shifted again, soft, insistent, like someone testing a boundary that wasn't theirs to cross. Then came the chomp, sharp, sudden, unmistakable. Noah's eyes opened fully now, staring into the dim ceiling as the sound echoed in his head. For a second he wondered if he had imagined it, but no, it was too distinct, too physical. It sounded like Tate had bitten someone, actually bitten them for daring to call him a Romeo and butt into his personal affairs. He listened harder, breath shallow. A startled noise broke the silence, followed by a sharp intake of breath, offended, shocked. Then came the scuffle of hurried footsteps retreating down the hallway, uneven and quick, like someone trying to escape before anything worse could happen. A door slammed moments later, loud and decisive, sealing the incident away as quickly as it had begun. Silence rushed back in, thick and watchful, pressing in around him as if nothing had happened at all. Noah stayed where he was, staring at the ceiling, his heart beating just a little faster now. A strange mix of disbelief, irritation, and reluctant amusement settled over him. Of course Tate would do something like that. Of course, even half frozen, half asleep and camped stubbornly outside his door, he would still react, still guard, still push back, still make himself known. It was ridiculous, it was excessive, it was so undeniably Tate. Noah exhaled slowly, dragging a hand over his face, already knowing this wouldn't be the end of it. Somewhere out there in the hallway, wrapped in blankets, cold air, and his own stubborn devotion, Tate was still holding his ground, dozing, freezing, and apparently biting anyone who got too close, as if the space outside Noah's door belonged to him alone. The hallway grew quiet again, but the tension lingered, humming in the walls. I could almost picture Tate, fists clenched, jaw tight, eyes wild in the darkened corridor, furious that someone dared to call him out, that someone dared to interrupt his obsessive vigil outside my door. I stayed still on the mattress, heart hammering, thinking how impossible it was to reason with him even in the dead of night. His attachment, his obsession, it didn't care about reason, about rules, about respect. It only knew one thing: he had to be near me to assert control, to be seen, The house was quiet now, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, quietly sipping my coffee when I noticed Tate glaring at someone across the table. I couldn't tell exactly who he was fixated on. His expression was sharp, almost predatory, but the intensity made the air tense. His uncle Joey was sitting at the table as well, casually eating while talking to Talia. Then Joey spoke up, loud enough for everyone to hear, his tone tinged with exasperation as if he were venting something that shouldn't have happened. Last night, I tripped over Tate in the hallway. I was just on my way to the bathroom on the third floor to use the toilet, and I told him to go back to his room and stop acting juvenile. And he swore at me, bit my arm and said the F word. He shook his head, glaring at Tate briefly before looking at Tate's mom. "What are you teaching him, Talia?" Talia laughed nervously, waving a hand at Joey as though to diffuse the tension. "Joey, it's complicated," she said, smiling tightly. "He's a work in progress. We're figuring things out." I watched Tate's face darken even more, his jaw tightening as he stared at his uncle as he'd just been publicly humiliated. The way he clenched his fists under the table, the flare of his nostrils, even his silence, it spoke volumes. He wasn't going to let this go, not with anyone. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, knowing that whatever came next it wasn't going to be calm. Tate's temper was like a storm waiting to break, and this morning I was stuck in the middle of it. Tate smirked at his uncle, slow and deliberate as he made quiet chomping sounds, his teeth snapping lightly in the air. It wasn't random, it was intentional, taunting, meant to rile Joey, to remind him exactly what had happened before and what could happen again. Joey's expression darkened instantly. He glared, jaw tightening as Tate kept grinding his teeth together, the motion sharp and restless like a rabid dog testing its restraint. "You see that?" Joey snapped, gesturing toward him. "He's threatening me again." Tate didn't stop. If anything, he leaned into it, his tongue dragging slowly across his teeth before he licked his lips, eyes locked on Joey with something unreadable and dangerous flickering underneath the surface. "I'll bite you even worse," Tate said quietly, voice low and steady, "if you put your hands on me, or tell me to stay away from Noah." The room seemed to tighten around the words. Tate didn't move, didn't blink, just watched, daring Joey to try. The tension at the table thickened as Uncle Joey continued, voice sharper now, cutting through the usual morning chatter like a blade. "My nephew is acting inappropriate. It's unnatural and frankly weird," he said, jabbing a finger lightly toward Tate without directly touching him. "You need to nip this in the bud before the entire town starts talking. I've never seen a grown adult sleep outside their best friend's door, like a Romeo. And you know exactly what I mean by that word. It's inappropriate, it's humiliating the Blue family." "It's important that Tate is happy," Terrence said. I flinched slightly as Tate's eyes flicked toward me, dark and stormy, but he stayed silent, clenched fists under the table. Talia's eyes darted between Joey and Tate, clearly uncomfortable but too wary to intervene. I could feel Tate's jaw tighten, the blush rising in his cheeks, the kind that made him look young and feral all at once. His hands trembled ever so slightly on his lap, a mix of anger, shame, and something like despair. I just sat there, heart hammering, knowing that whatever words came next, whatever reaction Tate had, it wasn't going to be calm. He never reacted calmly when someone criticized him, especially about me. And this was about me, the way he saw me, the way he felt about me. Joey looked at him like he was trying to put him back in a cage, pulling himself up into the posture of an authority figure, attempting to intimidate him into submission. But Tate didn't shrink. If anything, he leaned into it. A low, rough growl slipped from his throat, uneven and warning, his teeth bared as he stared Joey down. It wasn't controlled. It was deliberate, almost animalistic, like a rabid dog daring someone to come closer. He showed his teeth again, slower this time, dragging out the moment, turning it into something humiliating for his uncle rather than himself. The growling didn't stop. It lingered in his chest, vibrating in the space between them, refusing to back down, refusing to soften. Joey might have been trying to assert control, but Tate made it clear in the most unsettling way possible that he wasn't something that could be handled so easily. The room fell silent for a moment after Joey finished, all of us frozen under the weight of the words. Tate's glare could have cut glass, but still he said nothing. I could only imagine the storm building behind his eyes, a storm I had no idea how to weather. Talia cleared her throat, glancing at Tate with a gentle, almost pleading expression. "Maybe you should start sleeping in your room again, Tate," she suggested softly. "Give Noah some space, it might be good for both of you." Tate's eyes narrowed toward Talia. Shut the fuck up. My eyes bulged hearing Tate sass his mother. Terrence responded quickly, don't talk to your mother like that. I'll sleep wherever I want, Tate muttered, his voice low but defiant. He was smothering his toast with butter, crushing it almost violently as if the act itself expressed his frustration. Bits of toast slid across his plate, but he barely noticed, too absorbed in his simmering anger. Talia nudged Terrence slightly, her eyes silently imploring him to back her up to support her suggestion. Terrence, however, remained silent, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Talia exhaled quietly. It seemed she was on her own. Do something, Joey snapped, turning to his older brother. If you're not going to act like the man of the house, maybe I should deal with it myself. Your incompetence is going to make this family look bad in the community. Terrence didn't respond right away. Joey scoffed, pressing on, his voice louder now, sharper. You want the neighbors talking, you want people in town saying, there goes Tate Blue, sleeping outside his childhood companion's door like he's got some fixation. He let the words hang, then added with a sneer, you want LA calling him a homosexual, a queer. The dining room seemed to tighten, the air thick with something ugly and heavy. Joey turned back toward Tate, pointing down the hall. Go back to your room, Tate, after lights out, okay? Acting like this at your age, this is embarrassing. Tate didn't move. For a moment no one did. Aunt Julia and Uncle Tim exchanged a glance before nodding in agreement. Maybe it's for the best, nephew, Tim said gently. A little distance might actually do wonders for both of you. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder, you know. Tate shot him a hard glare. I'm an adult, he snapped. I can sleep, date, or spend my time with whoever I choose. If you don't like where I sleep or who I spend my time with, that's your problem, not mine. Unless you're the one sharing my bed, it's none of your business. Then Terrence's eyes narrowed and he finally shifted, his gaze sliding past Joey and landing on me instead. Not quick, not uncertain, deliberate, measuring, like whatever happened next was going to involve me whether I wanted it to or not. I'll work out the particulars, Terrence said evenly from the head of the breakfast table, his tone controlled as he looked at Tate. After breakfast. There's nothing to work out, old man, Tate shot back immediately, his voice cutting through the quiet clink of dishes. It's none of your fucking business. The table went still, forks paused midair, no one moved, Tate didn't stop. Why don't you go back to bed and fuck yourself, he added, his lip curling slightly, and leave me in peace to eat my breakfast. The defiance in his voice wasn't loud, it was worse than that. Cold, certain, like he had already decided no one sitting at that table had any authority over him. Terrence didn't react right away, he just sat there, hands still, eyes fixed on Tate, but something in his expression shifted, tightening, sharpening, like control being tested in front of an audience. Joey leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling under his breath, watching the exchange like he was waiting for it to tip into something worse. And Tate, still seated, still unyielding, didn't look away. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to apologize to me and to your mother, Terrence said, his voice low but unmistakably firm, cutting through the table. Or I stand up and deal with this myself, Tate. The room froze around him. I'm sorry, Noah said quickly, the words coming out before he could stop them. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, I'll go. Joey pushed his chair back, the legs scraping softly against the floor as he started to stand. Take a seat, Noah, and be quiet, Joey urged, his voice sharp, authoritative, like he was seizing control of something that wasn't his. Tate moved before Noah had fully risen from his seat, reaching out and wrapping his hands gently around Noah's shoulders. Without taking his eyes off Uncle Joey, Tate pulled Noah a little closer and pressed a brief kiss to his temple. Only then did Tate look back at Joey, meeting his gaze with a hard, unwavering glare. The gesture wasn't subtle, it was deliberate, a silent declaration meant as much for Joey as it was for Noah. Tate's head snapped toward Uncle Joey. His whole body going rigid as anger surged through him. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing into a hard glare that didn't waver. Don't you talk to him that way, you bastard, Tate yelled, his voice sharp and explosive, cutting through the room. The word hung there, heavy and reckless. Joey blinked, caught off guard for half a second, but Tate didn't back down. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, like he was ready for a fight if it came to it. You don't get to talk down to him like that, Tate snapped, pointing sharply. I don't care who you think you are, you don't get to treat him like he's nothing. The tension thickened instantly, the kind that made the air feel tight. Noah shifted slightly behind Tate, startled by how fast he'd escalated, but Tate didn't look back. His focus was locked entirely on Joey, anger burning hot and protective. Say something like that again, Tate added, voice lower now but more dangerous, and we're going to have a real problem. As a guest you have no authority, Tate said coldly, his eyes locking onto Joey. You're an interloper, this is my house, and as long as I live longer than Terrence I will be inheriting this property. Piss me off, and the moment I claim this mansion you won't be welcome here. The words landed like a strike. Tate leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, edged with something far more dangerous than anger. If you don't like what's going on, Joey, why don't you get the fuck out? Nobody would miss you. Silence swallowed the table whole. Noah hovered halfway between sitting and standing, caught in the middle of something that was no longer just tension, it was a fracture, widening in real time. Terrence hadn't moved yet, but the threat of him standing hung over all of them. Maybe it's best if you both share space responsibly, and act your age, Tate, Talia added under her breath, a quiet attempt to reason with him. Tate's jaw tightened. He spat out, Joey should fucking mind his own business, he's just a guest, before pushing his chair back with a loud bang and storming out of the kitchen, leaving a faint trail of butter and crushed toast behind him. Noah, you're done with breakfast, come with me. The table sat in an awkward silence after he left. Talia sighed, shaking her head, glancing at Terrence. He didn't offer a word of support. I just sat there watching the mess unfold, thinking that managing Tate was going to be an exhausting, endless battle. He has gone far enough, Joey said, his tone tense but controlled as he walked up the stairs. I'm going upstairs to sort out his rude behavior. After Uncle Joey left the breakfast table to deal with Tate's disrespectful behavior, Noah quietly pushed his chair back and rose from his seat. Hopping to slip away before anyone noticed, he turned toward the staircase. He had barely taken a few steps when Terrence's voice cut through the silence behind him. Noah. The single word stopped him in his tracks. Noah froze at the foot of the stairs before slowly turning back to face the table. Wait down here, leave them alone, Noah. I didn't answer Terrence. Something told me I needed to see this for myself. As I neared the landing, I could hear Uncle Joey's voice, low but firm, echoing down the hall. You need to understand that your actions have consequences. Tate's voice cracked, defensive. I wasn't doing anything wrong, Noah's mine, I just want him here. Stop acting like a Romeo kid, Joey snapped, stepping closer, his hands brushing Tate's shoulders to steady him. You can't harass someone into staying with you, it's humiliating. I'm telling you as clearly as I can, apologize for tripping me last night and start acting your age. I'm not apologizing, you don't understand, you don't get it, Tate shouted, panic and fury mixing in his tone. His chest heaved as he tried to pull away from Joey's grip. You're acting like a child, Joey said, voice low and controlled. Noah has a right to space, you need to own your behavior or you'll lose him entirely, do you want that? I know, I don't care, I won't let him go, Tate hissed, eyes wide with desperation. Then maybe I'll help you understand, Joey pressed, leaning in. You're pushing everyone away, admit you were wrong, say the words, just start to take responsibility, you owe that much to the people around you. Joey was pressed up against Tate, one hand braced on the wall behind him, the other gripping Tate's arm and shoulder. Tate's back was pinned flat against the cold wood paneling, legs braced, fists pounding helplessly against Joey's chest. I could see his eyes wide, almost frantic, and the way he trembled not just with anger but with fear. Stop being a fucking brat, Joey's voice carried, sharp and deliberate, louder now so I could hear every word. Since your parents won't do it, maybe I should put you over my knee and spank the daylights out of you. You're a little cunt sometimes, Tate, and you're going to learn a lesson whether you like it or not. Tate's chest heaved. I didn't do anything wrong, you can't get off me. His voice cracked, a mix of defiance and panic, and I realized just how terrified he was. His entire body shook, not from rage but from sheer terror of what Joey was saying and doing. I love you, Tate, Joey continued, almost softening for a moment, but I will not let you humiliate yourself or anyone else with this behavior. You're smarter than this, you're better than this, but right now you're a frightened child hiding behind a mask of rage. Tate's eyes darted around looking for any escape, any way out. He kicked and thrashed trying to push Joey off, but Joey's grip was ironclad. I can't do this, Tate stammered. His voice had lost all of its earlier bravado. Tate was having a panic attack and Joey's arm around his throat wasn't helping Tate's anxiety. Then listen, Joey shouted, lifting his voice even higher. Own your actions, Tate. Take responsibility for yourself. Stop lashing out. You're not some Romeo from a fairy tale. You're a human being and you need to learn boundaries. Tate tried to pull away one last time, desperation boiling over. His foot shot out, hitting Joey's groin. Joey let out a strangled cry, collapsing backward, gripping himself, and that moment of distraction was all Tate needed. He bolted down the hall like a wild animal, terror and adrenaline fueling every step. His bedroom door slammed with a resounding bang, the lock clicking into place. Heavy, ragged breathing rattled through the quiet house as Tate collapsed against the door from the inside, bolting the lock from within the room. I stayed on the landing, frozen, heart-pounding, watching Joey groan on the floor, gasping for air. "That boy," Joey muttered finally, wincing, he's a hurricane trapped in a house." A storm of fear, rage, and desperation. You don't understand until you've seen it firsthand. I sank against the wall, staring at the closed door. Tate was terrified and he'd never admit it, but I could see it. The mask of anger he wore so often had slipped, leaving the raw, vulnerable kid underneath. And for the first time I understood the full weight of what living with him and trying to navigate him really meant. I was standing outside the room, heart hammering, when Tate's music blasted so loud it rattled the walls. Rock guitars screamed over the distorted speakers and I could hear him kicking the floor and swearing like a man possessed. "Where the fuck do you think you're going?" Joey shouted, his voice cutting through the music, raw and desperate. "You're not leaving until you see me, Tate." I hesitated outside Tate's bedroom door, trying to stay calm. "Tate, maybe we should talk, just open the door," I called softly over the chaos. Before I could react, the door flung open with such force I nearly fell backwards. Tate's hand shot out, grabbing my arm, yanking me into the room. He slammed the door behind me, the lock clicking into place. The music thumped like a heartbeat, shaking the room, and I stumbled slightly, pressed against the wall. "Don't even think about leaving," Tate hissed, voice low and urgent, his chest pressing against mine. "I'm not letting you go, not until I see you, not until I have you." I tried to pull back, but his grip was iron strong. My pulse was racing as he held me in place, frantic, terrified, and obsessive all at once. "Tate, let me," I started, but he cut me off with a sharp shove, spinning me toward the center of the room. He pressed closer, voice trembling. I can't be alone with that dragon outside my door threatening to spank me. I need you here, you're mine today and you're not leaving." I froze, caught between fear and disbelief. The storm of music, anger, and desperation pressed against me from every direction. Tate wasn't just upset, he was terrified, wild, and utterly unwilling to let go. And for the first time that night I realized there was no reasoning with him. All I could do was brace myself and hope the storm didn't break me. At dinner, the tension in the room was thick. Uncle Joey was still swearing under his breath, muttering curses that had nothing to do with the food. Tate was fidgeting in his chair, scowling, slamming his fork down, and glaring at anyone who dared make eye contact, especially when Joey looked at Tate. Finally, Joey snapped. He stood abruptly, muttering something about "enough of this shit," and grabbed Tate's arm, pulling him from the table. "Come on, Romeo," Joey hissed, jerking him toward the hallway and a random bedroom on the ground level. The door slammed behind them, muffling the chaos for a moment, but not completely. From my seat I could hear the shouting, muffled at first, then growing louder. Tate's high-pitched, frantic voice echoed, "Let me go, you're not my boss." Joey's voice was harsh and clipped. "Act like a man, Tate, you're behaving like a child and I'm not going to let it slide any longer." I winced as a sharp sound cut through like a slap and Tate yelped. "Stop it, you can't do that," he screamed, voice shaking with fury and terror. "Maybe a little physical reminder is exactly what you need," Joey snapped, gripping Tate firmly. "You need to learn boundaries, you can't just terrorize everyone around you and expect no consequences." Tate's voice rose, cracking under panic. "I don't need lessons, I don't need anyone, I just want Noah to stay with me." "You're acting insane," Joey shouted back. You're lucky someone cares enough to keep you from completely losing it. I sat frozen at the table, unable to step in. I didn't like how rough Joey was being, but it wasn't my place. Tate's terror was raw and horrifying, but I could hear the frustration and exasperation in Joey's tone. He wasn't just punishing Tate, he was trying to wake him up to the consequences of his obsessive behavior. From elsewhere on the same level, the muffled sounds of Joey and Tate arguing carried through the house. Their voices rose and fell, punctuated by the thud of bodies shoving into furniture and the scrape of shoes across the bedroom floor. Everyone seated around the dining room table could hear it. An uneasy silence settled over dinner. Noah lowered his eyes to his plate, forcing himself to keep eating his chicken even as every crash from the bedroom made him flinch. The tension in the house was impossible to ignore, and he wished the argument would end before it escalated any further. From down the hall, Joey's voice rang out, firm and unmistakable. "You are going to apologize." Another loud thump echoed through the house. "You are a grown man, Tate, start acting like one." The argument continued, with Joey refusing to back down. "You do not speak to your elders that way," he said sharply. "And you certainly don't bite someone because you're angry. That behavior is unacceptable." The room remained quiet except for the clinking of silverware against plates, everyone pretending to focus on dinner while listening to the confrontation unfolding down the hall. Noah heard a loud crash from the bedroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of two bodies hitting the floor. He winced. From the noise alone, he guessed Joey had managed to wrestle Tate down and was holding him in place long enough to make his point. Joey's voice carried clearly through the hall. "Do you give up?" he demanded. "Are you finally going to stop acting like a 5-year-old and start behaving like a member of this family?" There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of struggling. "I don't care how you feel about that blonde bed warmer," Joey continued firmly. "You are going to treat your family with respect, and until you can acknowledge your behavior and agree to change it, you're staying right where you are." Another muffled protest came from Tate, but Joey didn't budge. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Joey said, his voice calmer now. "I'm trying to get through to you. When you're ready to have a respectful conversation, I'll let you up." Noah could hear Tate struggling against his uncle in the nearby bedroom. Shoes scraped harshly across the hardwood floor, followed by the scuff of shifting weight and the rattle of furniture being jostled. The sounds came in bursts, wood creaking, feet sliding, and fingernails scraping against the floor as Tate tried to free himself. Joey let out a strained grunt, clearly exerting himself as he worked to keep his athletic nephew from getting back to his feet. "Settle down, Tate," Joey said between breaths. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Another scrape echoed through the hall as Tate continued to resist. Down at the dining room table, Noah stared at his plate, his appetite fatting with every sound. He couldn't bring himself to look at anyone else. The confrontation unfolding only a short distance away was impossible to ignore, and each thud made the tension in the room feel heavier. The struggle continued for nearly another 30 minutes. From the dining room, the occasional thud and scrape still carried through the hall, though the bursts of movement had become less frequent. It sounded as though Joey was continuing to physically restrain Tate, determined not to let the confrontation escalate further until his nephew had calmed down. Joey's breathing was audible between his words, suggesting the effort was taking a toll on him. Tate was in his physical prime, strong, athletic, with the speed and agility that made him difficult to restrain for any length of time. "Tate," Joey said, his voice firm but measured, "this isn't about winning. It's about learning that you can't lash out at your family whenever you're angry." The room fell quiet again, except for the sound of strained breathing. "You've got to stop reacting like this," Joey continued. "You don't get to disrespect people, lose your temper, and then expect everyone to ignore it. You're better than this." At the dining room table, no one seemed eager to interrupt. The family ate in uneasy silence, each person acutely aware of the tense confrontation taking place just down the hall. Noah found himself listening more than eating, hoping the argument would finally end before anyone was hurt. Talia attempted to steer the conversation in a different direction, forcing a small smile despite the tension hanging over the table. So, as I was saying, she began, the silent auction to raise money for the Alzheimer's convention at the regional hospital is coming together nicely. We've already had several generous donations. Her voice was suddenly drowned out. Noe, noe, noe. Tate's desperate cries echoed from the nearby bedroom, carrying clearly through the hall. The dining room fell silent. Talia's smile vanished. She looked anxiously toward the hallway before turning to her husband, giving him a gentle nudge. Terence, aren't you going to do something? Terence remained composed, calmly cutting another piece of food from his plate before looking up. He gave a slow shake of his head. My brother knows what he's doing, he said evenly. Joey will sort it out and then we can move forward. Talia looked unconvinced, her concern lingering as another muffled exchange carried through the house. Noah sat frozen at the table, his stomach tightening every time he heard Tate call his name, unsure whether to stay where he was or get up and intervene. I was halfway through my fried chicken, the smell of butter and spices filling my senses when I heard Tate screaming and Joey yelling obscenities at his nephew. Then, a sound ripped through the dining room like a knife. It wasn't just a scream, it was a high-pitched, guttural wail, one from Tate that made my stomach twist. I heard Uncle Joey scream a blood-curdling yell and then it sounded like Tate was running across a bedroom floor. My fork froze in midair and I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. Tate burst from the bedroom, his movements frantic and jerky like a cornered animal. His eyes were wide, wild, and darting from one person to another, his chest heaving. He, his words stumbled over themselves, caught somewhere between panic and anger. I didn't know what had happened at first. My brain was still trying to process Joey's earlier shouting, the fight in the closet, the slamming doors. But then I saw Joey slowly, painfully emerging from the closet, his face pale and drawn. One hand gripped his arm tightly, the other trembled as if he was afraid to touch it. And then I saw it. Tate had bitten Joey again. It wasn't a playful nip or a grab, this was full force, teeth sunk deep into flesh. I could see the full impression of Tate's upper and lower teeth perfectly outlined in Joey's skin. The red, angry mark stood out sharply against the pale skin. And I could almost see the tiny punctures where each tooth had broken through. Blood had started to bead and trickle down Joey's forearm, stark against his shirt. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging out as if the world had slowed. Tate froze, eyes wide with a mix of shock, fear, and defiance. His chest rose and fell erratically and his fingers twitched as if he wanted to pull back but couldn't. Joey hissed through clenched teeth, a sharp sound of pain and fury, his free hand shaking as he pressed against the bite. The dining room fell into an eerie silence. My fried chicken tasted suddenly metallic, bitter in my mouth. Talia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. My heart thudded painfully as I watched Tate, a wild, terrified child in a grown man's body, realize exactly what he had done. Get the fuck, Joey's voice broke off and he inhaled sharply, pressing harder on the wound, his fingers slick with blood. Tate took a step back, wobbling on his feet, eyes darting like prey. I didn't mean to, I didn't mean it. His voice cracked, high and urgent, almost like a child caught in a nightmare. Every muscle in my body tensed. I wanted to move, to intervene, to make it stop, but I couldn't. I was frozen, watching the physical manifestation of Tate's obsession and lack of control laid bare in Joey's bleeding arm. What did you do, Tate? I shouted, jumping up from my chair, my voice shaking. Joey seethed while wincing in pain. Tell Talia you can't go around biting your uncle. Tate froze for a second, eyes wide like a cornered animal, chest heaving. I didn't mean it, I felt intimidated. His voice cracked, a mix of panic and defiance. He was coming at me and I didn't know what else to do. No, you didn't mean it, Joey shouted through gritted teeth, his voice cracking with pain and fury. You didn't mean it. I told you not to. You think being intimidated gives you the right to bite someone in this house. Tate stuttered, trembling. I just wanted Noah, I didn't want to hurt anyone else. Joey's eyes narrowed, veins visible in his neck. You want him? You think that excuses this? He stepped closer, pain and anger radiating off him in waves. You've gone too far, I don't care if he's your snuggle buddy, you do not lay hands on me. Tate's body shook, fists curling at his sides. Words failed him, panic and fear were raw in every movement. Without warning, he bolted, sprinting around the dining table like a wild animal, knocking over chairs in his desperate escape. "Get back here, you little bastard!" Joey roared, limping after him, still clutching his bleeding arm. He lunged toward Tate, hands outstretched, but Tate ducked and scrambled up the stairs. The sound of blood-pounding footsteps and slamming furniture filled the house. "Stop him, don't let him," I started, but Joey didn't need my prompting. He was a man on fire, chasing Tate, screaming, yelling, the mix of pain, fury, and disbelief tearing from his throat. "You little cunt, come back here and face what you've done. You're going to pay for this, I swear it." Tate's voice was high-pitched now, panicked, almost a wail. "No, no, I didn't mean it. Leave me alone, I didn't mean it." Joey's shouts echoed after him, filling the house. "You think fear gives you the right to bite your favorite uncle? You think your obsession with the blonde makes this okay? You are out of control and I'm not letting it slide. Face me, Romeo, face what you did to my arm." Finally, Tate slammed his bedroom door with a violent bang and twisted the lock. Heavy, ragged breaths rattled from behind the door. Joey leaned against the railing, hand pressed to his arm, still screaming in frustration and pain. "You little, oh God, you little brat." I stood frozen, chest tight, hands trembling. I could still hear Tate's frantic, terrified gasps behind the door, Joey's cursing echoing down the hall, and the chaotic energy in the house like a storm that refused to pass. My fried chicken sat untouched, forgotten. Tate's obsession, panic, and desperate need for control had collided with real consequences, leaving everyone, Joey, Tate, and me, shaken and on edge. The sound of shouts and slamming doors echoed through the house as I ran up the stairs after Joey. My heart was hammering, chest tight, as I saw him reach Tate's bedroom door, fists raised. "Joey, stop!" I yelled, barreling toward him. I threw myself between him and the door, hands pressing on his chest. "Stop it, you're scaring him." Joey froze for a second, glaring down at me, jaw tight, breathing ragged. "Noah, he needs to learn," he growled, voice low and dangerous. "He can't just keep acting like this, he has to face consequences." "I know he does, but this," I gestured at the locked door, my voice shaking, "this will terrify him even more. He's already panicking, and you breaking down the door will make it worse." Tate's frantic, shaky breaths came through the wood, high-pitched and uneven. "And Noah, please." His voice cracked and I flinched. My stomach lurched. He sounded like a child cornered, and I realized how close he was to full-blown panic. Joey's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, the fury and pain giving way to a flash of concern. "I'm not trying to hurt him," he muttered, almost to himself. I can't let him go on like this." I stepped closer to the door, pressing my hand lightly against it, my other hand on Joey's arm. "Then talk to him, calm him down, don't force him, please. He's scared and you're making it worse. You've got to let him feel safe before he'll even listen." There was silence for a moment, just the low hum of the music Tate had blasted earlier still vibrating faintly through the walls, and Tate's ragged breathing. Joey's chest rose and fell, his fist hovering, but he didn't strike. Okay," he muttered finally, stepping back slightly, "but if he doesn't calm down, then we'll deal with it together," I said firmly, voice steady despite the fear twisting in my stomach. "But not like this, not by breaking the door down. He's terrified, and right now that matters more than punishment." From the other side of the door, Tate whimpered softly. I could feel my pulse racing as I pressed a hand against the wood, silently willing him to trust me. Joey stood tense behind me, but slowly he eased, his anger contained for now. I realized then, the real battle wasn't just between Joey and Tate, it was trying to keep Tate from completely unraveling and somehow keeping everyone in the house from getting hurt in the process. "Before you even think about putting your hands on me again," Tate hissed from behind the door, his voice trembling with equal parts fury and fear, "I'll bite you again. You can't hit or slap me without getting hurt." I froze for a second, my pulse racing. The bite earlier had left Joey bleeding and furious. Tate wasn't bluffing. But there was a strange, desperate logic in the way he said it, as if he needed to assert control over the chaos he'd created. Joey took a step back, his jaw tight, face flushed with both pain and frustration. He glared at the door, but after a long pause he finally muttered, "Yeah, all right, I'm leaving before I regret my behavior." With that, he stalked down the stairs, muttering curses under his breath, limping slightly from the bite. The house suddenly felt quieter, the echoes of screaming and banging fading into an uneasy silence. I waited for a long moment, letting the tension settle, heart still hammering in my chest. Tate's breathing behind the door was heavy and uneven. I knew he was still on edge, still trembling from the confrontation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I knocked gently. "It's me," I called softly. There was a pause, then, faintly, I heard the lock turn and the door creaked open just enough for me to slip inside. Tate was slumped against the far wall, shoulders trembling, eyes wide and wary like he'd been expecting another storm at any moment. I stepped in carefully, keeping my hands visible, my voice calm. "It's okay, Tate, Joey's gone, I'm here, nothing's going to happen to you." He flinched slightly, still too scared to speak, but I could see the tension slowly draining from his body. He was terrified, yes, but finally, for a moment, he was safe. "Tate, are you okay?" I asked quietly as I stepped into his room, my voice tentative. Tate didn't turn to look at me. Instead, he smirked, a crooked, dangerous little curl of his lips that made my stomach twist. "Joey's an ass," he said, staring out the window, the sunlight catching the sharp lines of his face. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "He's just trying to." "Trying to what?" Tate interrupted, spinning slightly in his chair, eyes black and piercing. "The guy doesn't live here, he shows up twice a month, thinks he has some kind of authority over me." Over us, his gaze shot to mine for a heartbeat, sharp and electric, before flicking back to the window. "Fuck him." I felt the tension in the room coil around me, suffocating and magnetic at the same time. Tate's words weren't just defiance, they were a declaration, a warning, a challenge all rolled into one. The way he said it, so casually but with fire beneath the surface, made it impossible to speak. I shifted, uncomfortable but unable to look away. Even after all the chaos, the scuffles, the threats, he was still Tate, untouchable, untamed, and utterly consuming in the way he claimed his space, his rules, and indirectly me. Noah was stunned by Uncle Joey's physical intervention with Tate. In all the years Noah had known Tate, ever since they were 4 years old, not once had anyone in the Blue family ever raised a fist, grabbed him in anger, or even screamed at him. The house had always been warm, patient, and affectionate. Disagreements were usually settled with conversations, not shouting matches. Joey had never laid a hand on Tate throughout his entire childhood. Not once. It wasn't until after Tate's 18th birthday, when he was legally an adult, and his outbursts had become increasingly difficult to manage, that Joey finally decided enough was enough. Even then, Noah understood this wasn't an act of cruelty or punishment. Joey wasn't trying to hurt his nephew, he was trying to stop behavior that had spiraled beyond what calm conversations seemed able to reach. From Noah's perspective, it felt surreal. The Blue household had never been a place where physical confrontations happened. It had always been filled with warmth, laughter, family dinners, and the expectation that everyone treated one another with kindness and respect. But lately, Tate had begun reacting to conflict in ways that reminded Noah of a much younger child, lashing out, refusing to listen, and letting his emotions dictate his actions. It seemed that Joey and Terrence had finally reached the point where they believed something had to change. Watching it unfold left Noah deeply unsettled. The entire scene felt foreign in a house where physical restraint had never been part of family life, making it all the more shocking to witness. Joey learned a valuable lesson from that day. Afterward, he decided he would never again confront Tate physically, no matter how disrespectful or argumentative his nephew became. The incident had accomplished little besides escalating emotions, and Joey realized that force wasn't the answer. From then on, the rules were simple. If Tate became disrespectful, used profanity at the dinner table, or spoke inappropriately to members of the household, either Terrence or Joey would calmly tell him to leave the room and go to his bedroom until he was ready to return with a better attitude. The adults didn't argue. They didn't negotiate. They simply enforced the boundary. It took only a few instances before Tate understood they were serious. If he couldn't behave respectfully, he wouldn't be included in family conversations or meals until he could. A few days later, the visit came to an end. Joey returned to his home in Arizona while Tim and Julia headed back to New York. Their departure left the Blue household noticeably quieter, and before long, life settled back into its familiar routine with just Tate, Noah, and the rest of the family. Before Joey left, however, Tate made one thing unmistakably clear. "If you ever put your hands on me again," he said, his voice calm but unwavering, "you'll regret it." Joey held his nephew's gaze for a long moment before giving a small nod. "I heard you," he replied. Neither man said anything more. The boundary had been established on both sides, and although the tension between them hadn't disappeared, they both understood that any future disagreements would have to be handled very differently. Joey ended up needing 37 stitches in his arm after Tate bit him during the physical altercation. The injury was severe enough that everyone in the family recognized just how badly the confrontation had escalated. For Joey, it reinforced that physically restraining Tate had been a mistake. What had begun as an attempt to stop his nephew's behavior had resulted in a serious injury and left both of them shaken. After that incident, Joey made a firm decision. He would never again try to handle Tate's outbursts through physical intervention. From then on, any disrespect, profanity, or disruptive behavior would be met with clear consequences instead. Tate would simply be told to leave the room until he was calm enough to return respectfully. The bite, and the 37 stitches that followed, became a lasting reminder to everyone in the household that physical confrontations only made an already volatile situation worse. During the last week of July, the power went out one evening after dinner while Maya was visiting. Without electricity, the house grew noticeably darker and quieter. The air conditioning shut off, the lights disappeared, and the only illumination came from the fading twilight beyond the windows. The temperature had dropped to just under 50 degrees. It wasn't freezing, but it was cool enough that no one wanted to sit around in short sleeves. Before long, people began reaching for coats, sweaters, and thick blankets to stay comfortable. The Blue Mansion, usually warm and full of life, suddenly felt still as the family gathered together, waiting for the power to return. The day blurred into survival mode. We fed logs into the living room fireplace, huddling close to the warmth, cups of tea constantly refilled. Tate's parents moved calmly through it all, practical, unfazed, as if this were just another inconvenience to be managed. Maya had come over around 7 o'clock after dinner and we were watching TV. The lights went off around 8:30 and Talia came into the living room to announce the news. "Well," Talia said gently, "the heat and electricity are off for now. We'll have to share beds and blankets tonight. No sense in freezing." She looked at me, then at Maya, then briefly at Tate. I nodded first. It made sense. I'd already thought it through. When we went upstairs, I was deliberate about it. I took the right side of the bed. Maya climbed in next to me, warm and grateful, and Tate took the left, stiff and silent. Maya was between us. That mattered. The bed was large, but the cold pressed in anyway, forcing closeness whether we wanted it or not. I kept my arm loosely around Maya, more protective than possessive, feeling her steady breathing ground me. I felt safe, not because Tate was there, but because there was space between us now, a living boundary breathing softly in the dark. Tate didn't say anything, but I could feel his tension like a wire pulled too tight. His back was rigid, shoulders turned slightly away as if her presence offended him on principle. I knew what he was thinking. She was the reason we weren't touching like we used to. She was the reason Tate's arm couldn't drift across the bed to find Noah's. She was the cause of why old, unspoken rules no longer applied. But those rules had never been fair. I stared up at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, the fire downstairs crackling faintly. The cold forced us into this arrangement, but it didn't erase the truth of it. Maya wasn't an obstacle, she was a reminder. That closeness without consent wasn't closeness at all. What Tate missed wasn't just me, it was access. Eventually, Maya shifted closer in her sleep, her hand finding mine under the covers. Tate went still beside us like he was holding his breath. I didn't move. For the first time, I didn't make myself smaller to keep him comfortable, and even in the freezing dark, I knew I'd chosen right. I grasped Maya's hand, our fingers weaving together naturally, and gently drew her closer. She shifted without waking, her head settling against my chest as it belonged there. Her breathing evened out, slow and warm, and for the first time since the heat had gone out, I stopped shivering. In the darkness, I could feel Tate change. He didn't move, not really, but something in him tightened like a thought snapping into place. I could almost hear it the way I always had, the silent calculations, the resentment layering itself over hurt. This was different from before. This wasn't accidental closeness. This was chosen. Maya's weight against me wasn't just comfort, it was intention, and Tate knew it. I felt him turn slightly on his side, the mattress shifting just enough to give him awareness of us without touching. He was awake, I was sure of it. His breathing was too controlled, too measured, like someone pretending to sleep through something unbearable. I didn't look at him, that mattered. Maya slept between Tate and me. The bed was large, but the cold pressed in anyway, forcing closeness whether we wanted it or not. I kept my arm loosely around Maya, more protective than possessive, feeling her steady breathing ground me. I felt safe, not because Tate was there, but because there was space between us now, a living boundary breathing softly in the dark. Tate didn't say anything, but I could feel his tension like a wire pulled too tight. His back was rigid, shoulders turned slightly away as if her presence offended him on principle. I knew what he was thinking. She was the reason we weren't touching like we used to. She was the reason his arm couldn't drift across the bed. She was the reason the old, unspoken rules no longer applied. But those rules had never been fair. I stared up at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, the fire downstairs crackling faintly. The cold forced us into this arrangement, but it didn't erase the truth of it. Maya wasn't an obstacle, she was a reminder. That closeness without consent wasn't closeness at all. What Tate missed wasn't just me, it was access. Eventually, Maya shifted closer in her sleep, her hand finding mine under the covers. Tate went still beside us like he was holding his breath. I didn't move, and even in the freezing dark I knew I'd chosen right. I grasped Maya's hand, our fingers weaving together naturally, and gently drew her closer. She shifted without waking, her head settling against my chest as it belonged there. Her breathing evened out, slow and warm, and for the first time since the heat had gone out, I stopped shivering. In the darkness, I could feel Tate change. He didn't move, not really, but something in him tightened like a thought snapping into place. I could almost hear it the way I always had, the silent calculations, the resentment layering itself over hurt. This was different from before. This wasn't accidental closeness, this was chosen. Maya's weight against me wasn't just comfort, it was intention, and Tate knew it. I felt him turn slightly on his side, the mattress shifting just enough to give him awareness of us without touching. He was awake, I was sure of it. His breathing was too controlled, too measured, like someone pretending to sleep through something unbearable. I didn't look at him. I focused on the steady rise and fall beneath my palm, on the way Maya's fingers squeezed mine once in her sleep. There was no guilt in it, only resolve. This was what I had been trying to explain all along. I wasn't taking something from him, I was choosing something for myself. Tate's hand reached out almost instinctively, brushing toward mine as if I were the only thing in the room, as if Maya didn't exist. His fingers hovered over mine, the air between us charged with that magnetic pull I couldn't explain. I pulled my hand back, refusing. In the space between us, Maya slept peacefully, unaware of the storm she represented. To Tate, she wasn't just a girl in the bed, she was proof that the old closeness couldn't exist the same way anymore, that the rules had changed without his permission. I knew it hurt him, but I also knew that if I let go of her hand now, if I pulled away to ease his discomfort, I would be undoing everything I'd fought so hard to claim. So I stayed still, I held on. And in the quiet, with the cold pressing in and jealousy humming beside us, I understood something with painful clarity. Tate wasn't angry because he'd lost me. He was angry because I no longer belonged only to him. I felt him shift beside me, the mattress creaking softly under his weight. My heart skipped a beat before I realized it was just Tate moving closer. My body tensed instinctively, even half asleep, as if anticipating a fight or a shove, but he wasn't aggressive this time. He was deliberate, careful, like a predator trying not to disturb a nest. Then his hand slid under my shirt, my breath hitched and my pulse spiked. His fingers brushed my chest, warm, firm, alive. I froze, unsure if I should pull away or speak up. The instinct to move was strong, but the reality of him settling like this, silently, almost reverently, made me hesitate. Maya lay between us, curled up in her own little cocoon of blankets, completely oblivious. Her presence added a surreal tension to the moment, a reminder that someone else could have walked in and misread everything. Tate knew it too. He was careful, measured, a ghost of touch that left no trace beyond my own awareness. I swallowed hard, my chest tight. This is insane. Why does this feel like it's everything and nothing at the same time? His hand lingered just long enough to remind me how close we always were, how intertwined we were in ways nobody else could see, then he withdrew as quietly as he'd come. Before I could even start processing, Tate climbed off the mattress, feet touching the floor silently. He moved around the bed like he owned the space, every step calculated, tense, a predator packing but not threatening. My mind raced. Is he going to leave? Is this some kind of test? I stayed frozen, unwilling to provoke him, unwilling to pull back, but every nerve in my body was aware, alert. Tate stripped, taking off every garment of clothing, and then climbed back on top of me, but this time it wasn't a struggle. No shoves, no force, no claim, just a deliberate settling. His presence was undeniable, close enough that our shoulders pressed together. The warmth of him radiated through my chest. My muscles wanted to coil, to push back, to resist the suffocating proximity, but I couldn't, and the worst, or maybe the best, part was that I didn't want to. His head came to rest lightly against mine. He didn't touch me beyond that, but I could feel the weight of his body, his heat, the subtle tension in the way he shifted slightly to find the most comfortable angle beside me. Every part of me was screaming that this was intimate, but my mind knew it wasn't meant to be sexual. Somehow, that made it worse. Maya stirred slightly, her soft murmur in sleep barely audible. She shifted, stretched a little, curled back up, eyes still closed. She had no idea what was happening, and that made it feel like a secret between Tate and me, thick and heavy, almost suffocating in its closeness. I whispered softly to myself, "Platonic, huh?" My voice felt small in the quiet room, my words barely cutting through the tension. He didn't respond, only exhaled softly, settling in closer, pressing warmth and presence against me. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of his chest against mine, the careful, controlled rhythm of him there without any intent beyond proximity. I couldn't stop my mind from racing. He's sweaty, we're both sweaty, from earlier, the wrestling, the struggle, the anger, the jealousy. He's pissed, possessive, and this is what it looks like when he's close without letting go. My body was on fire with awareness, every nerve alive, and yet he wasn't crossing any lines. Not intentionally, not yet. Tate's flaccid dick was pressed against my left thigh, exciting mine, and I thought of my mom to avoid an embarrassing situation. Tate shifted slightly again, stretching an arm over mine, his fingertips brushing against the curve of my shoulder, light, fleeting. My stomach twisted, a mix of panic and something darker, a memory of all the times he'd pinned me, pushed me, forced me to submit, and yet now, nothing, just him, close, so close and entirely platonic, or as close as it could be without anyone else knowing. I tried to breathe normally, but it was impossible. My chest rose and fell too fast. How is it possible for him to be this close and not cross the line? I felt a flicker of jealousy, imagining him anywhere else with anyone else, the sheer control he had over proximity and presence making my stomach knot with both fury and longing. Noah wasn't sure why Tate had climbed on top of him while they were sharing a bed with Maya present. He couldn't tell whether it had been an impulsive act born of jealousy over Maya's presence, or whether Tate had been unconsciously trying to stake a claim, to silently signal that Noah still belonged in his space despite his new relationship. The uncertainty lingered with Noah long after the moment had passed. No matter how he replayed it in his mind, he couldn't decide whether Tate had been acting out of possessiveness, insecurity, or simply a need for reassurance that Noah hadn't drifted too far away. "I can't think straight with you like this," I thought, voice low, almost pleading. His only response was a soft groan, a shift closer, and the heat of his body pressing into mine in a way that made the world shrink down to just the bed, just him, just the impossible closeness of our bodies. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on my own breathing, counting silently, trying to convince myself that it was platonic, that Maya would wake up and nothing here would have meaning beyond warmth and exhaustion. And yet, in the quiet of the room, the hum of the night around us, and the weight of him above me, I knew better, even if Maya had no clue, even if it was just platonic. I could feel him every inch, every subtle press and shift of his body, and I couldn't escape the truth. Nothing had ever been just platonic between us. I barely had the strength to keep my eyes open. Tate moved above me, warm and steady, and before I knew it, my clothes were gone. I didn't fight, not because I wanted him to, but because exhaustion had taken over every part of me. My body felt heavy, my mind foggy, and somehow with him there it felt safe. Pepe Le Pew. Tate shifted on top of me, his chest pressing lightly against mine. My hand was resting near Maya, who was curled up peacefully between us, asleep and completely unaware of what was happening. Tate gently lifted my left hand from Maya's grasp and intertwined his fingers with mine. The touch was firm but careful, deliberate yet soft. My chest tightened at the closeness, but I reminded myself over and over, this was platonic. He settled on me fully, nude and warm, and I couldn't deny the heat radiating from him, yet it wasn't sexual, not really. There was no intent beyond presence, protection, and some strange comfort in being close. My pulse raced, but it wasn't desire. It was the mixture of exhaustion, relief, and the intensity of having him so near. "Just sleep," he murmured softly, voice low and steady. His hand tightened slightly around mine, a quiet anchor. I let my body go completely, melting into the mattress under him. His weight was heavy but safe, grounding me in a way that made all the chaos of the day fade. The interlaced fingers, the warmth, the subtle rhythm of his breathing against mine, it was intimate but purely protective and somehow utterly necessary. Maya remained unaware, her soft breathing a constant reminder of the platonic boundary we both respected. Tate adjusted slightly, resting his head near mine, and I felt every inch of him close to me, all of it safe, all of it just being there. Maya's POV. I let my eyes close, heavy with fatigue. The room grew quiet except for our breathing, his hand holding mine, his warmth pressing gently against me. I surrendered to sleep, carried into it by the strange, comforting presence of a nude but entirely platonic buddy. By the time I drifted fully away, all that remained was the sense of protection, closeness, and the absurd intimacy that somehow felt completely natural. I woke to sunlight slipping through the blinds, soft and warm against my face. My eyes fluttered open, groggy and still half-dreaming, and immediately I felt the familiar weight of the bed beneath me. For a moment everything was calm, normal, the soft rustle of blankets, the faint hum of the morning, the gentle rhythm of breathing nearby. Then my gaze drifted to my left, and I froze. What I saw made my stomach flip. Noah, my boyfriend, my safe, familiar Noah, was lying on his back, completely nude but still. Over him was Tate. My first thought was confusion. Why was Tate on top of Noah? Then I noticed the blanket covering them, but both boys were nude underneath the sheet, details that made my heart slam against my ribs. Their bodies were pressed together, almost impossibly close, like one was a blanket over the other. My breath caught when I saw Tate's nose buried in Noah's neck, and my eyes widened further at the sight of their fingers intertwined. I blinked rapidly, trying to process. What is happening? Is this normal? My mind refused to settle. I wanted to wake up fully, shake it off, convince myself it was some trick of the light or a dream, but there it was in sharp, undeniable detail. Tate was draped across Noah's chest and stomach, and Noah's body was completely still beneath him. My pulse raced, and I felt an odd mixture of shock, disbelief, and, though I hated to admit it, a pang of jealousy twist in my chest. My mind spun. How long have they been like this? Are they? No, it can't be. It has to be platonic, right? The thought didn't help. The more I looked, the more my stomach tight. Their fingers were intertwined so naturally, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, and Noah, he wasn't moving, not even twitching. Tate's body pressed down like a warm weight, completely relaxed, entirely comfortable. I shifted slightly in bed, instinctively drawing the blankets closer around me. I didn't want to make a sound, didn't want to wake them, but I also couldn't look away. My mind raced with questions, anxiety prickling along my spine. Have they done this before? Is this sexual or just too intimate? My heart was hammering, and I felt a lump form in my throat as I tried to calm myself. I forced myself to breathe slowly, focusing on the small details, the rise and fall of Noah's chest, Tate's steady, even breathing, the way their hands were linked. My rational mind told me it had to be platonic. They've been through so much together. It's just comfort, trust, habit, right? But my stomach clenched anyway, and I couldn't ignore the strange tension that filled the air. Part of me wanted to call out, to wake Noah gently and ask what was happening, but another part of me was terrified to disturb them. What if I interrupt something I shouldn't? What if I misread this? I stayed still, frozen, heart racing, eyes darting between their bodies. The intimacy was undeniable, and my mind kept flipping through scenarios, each more absurd and impossible than the last. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about every possible meaning. Was it a protective thing? Platonic? Something more? Could I trust my own judgment, or was my jealousy clouding everything? My hands trembled slightly, and I pulled the blankets tighter around me as if shielding myself from the intensity of the scene before me. Minutes passed, or maybe it was just seconds, and still I lay there silent, absorbing the impossibility of it. Noah's calm, trusting stillness, Tate's warmth, the intertwined fingers, it was like watching something intimate without understanding the rules. I felt out of place, a spectator to a private world I wasn't part of, and yet it was painfully, undeniably there. Finally, I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breath. Okay, it's just them. It's platonic. They trust each other. They've always been complicated, but this isn't about me. It can't be. Even as I tried to reason, my pulse didn't slow, my stomach still fluttered, and my mind refused to settle. I peeked again, cautiously, heart thudding. Tate's head was still nestled against Noah's neck. Noah's eyes were closed, calm, his hand relaxed in Tate's. The scene was absurd, intimate, and somehow protective all at once. I exhaled slowly, still gripping the blanket, trying to reconcile what I saw with what I knew of them. And though I wanted to believe it was harmless, the image of Tate draped over my boyfriend, completely at ease, utterly nude and their fingers entwined, would linger in my mind for a long, long time. I blinked again, unable to look away. Tate had shifted slightly and my stomach tightened at the sight. His mouth, which had been nuzzled into Noah's neck, moved upward, hovering just centimeters from Noah's lips, brushing against his cheek. I caught him mumbling something softly, a garbled, sleep-heavy sound. "Bastard, Joey," he whispered, voice low and muffled. Then, almost absently, he swallowed in his sleep, his lips moving slightly as if tasting a dream. I tried to process what I was seeing. Tate was pressed against Noah in a way that made my pulse race. His body was fully nude, the heat radiating off him undeniable, and yet Noah remained still beneath him. Noah's face was calm, eyes closed, chest rising and falling steadily. My gaze flicked lower for a brief, horrified instant, and yes, Tate's body was reacting subtly physically, but Noah's wasn't. He was just lying there, peaceful, asleep, and completely unaware of the tension his friend was radiating. I felt my hands clench the blanket tighter, heart pounding in my chest. What am I even seeing? I told myself to breathe, to reason. Tate was asleep and he was a complicated, impossible presence in Noah's life. He had always been close, but this was something else. Fingers intertwined, chest pressed to chest, the head so close to Noah's lips. It was more than platonic, at least on Tate's side, though Noah didn't move, didn't respond. I swallowed hard and shifted slightly, careful not to disturb them. My mind raced, spinning in every direction. Do I say something? Do I wake Noah, or do I just watch and hope he wakes naturally? My pulse hammered, a mix of shock, jealousy, and that impossible, gnawing worry that I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. Noah, blissfully asleep, didn't stir. He didn't know, and I knew that if he did, it would be a shock. Tate, on the other hand, murmured and moved almost instinctively, caught between sleep and the pull of some residual tension. His body was alive in ways I hadn't expected, yet Noah remained calm, unresponsive, completely unaware of the energy radiating from the man draped over him. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself this wasn't a disaster. It's fine, it's just them, it's just Tate being complicated, it's not my place, it's not sexual, it's just intense, too intense. But even as I told myself that, my stomach knotted and my fingers clenched the blanket tighter. I couldn't take my eyes off them. I felt like a voyeur in a private moment, watching something that shouldn't exist in front of me. Tate's soft breaths, Noah's steady chest, the slight pressure of their intertwined fingers, it all seemed impossibly intimate. And yet, despite everything, Noah remained untouched by desire, still asleep, still calm, still mine. I didn't move, I didn't breathe too loudly, I just watched, my mind spinning with questions, my heart hammering in my chest. How could something so close, so personal, feel completely innocent on one side and almost unbearably intense on the other? I felt a pang of jealousy I couldn't even name. I'd never seen two boys this close, this exposed, this physically entwined. Both were only 18, and yet the intimacy, nakedness, weight, warmth, the intertwined fingers felt like a betrayal, though I knew logically it wasn't meant for me to feel that way. My brain fought itself, spinning desperately for explanations. It's platonic, it's just sleep, it's just comfort, they've always been close. But my heart refused to calm. The sight of Tate's nude body draped over Noah, the soft curve of his chest pressing into Noah's, the heat radiating from him, I couldn't ignore it. My fingers gripped the blanket tighter, nails digging into the soft fabric as my thoughts raced. Why are they like this? Why are they naked? Why am I the only one awake? The rationalizations collided with my gut instinct. It's normal for them. It's just sleep. It's protection. It's friendship. Yet my stomach twisted with another, darker thought. Noah doesn't seem affected. Tate is obviously reacting, and I feel jealous, I feel wronged. But why? He's just a friend, right? My pulse pounded painfully as I struggled to reconcile what my eyes were telling me with what my mind tried to justify. I shifted slightly, careful not to make a sound, careful not to disturb them. But every movement of my body seemed to magnify the intimacy I was witnessing. Tate's subtle shifts, the soft murmur of his sleep, the almost predatory way he rested over Noah, it all screamed something my brain refused to acknowledge fully. It's not sexual, it can't be sexual, it's just closeness, maybe obsession, maybe comfort. But it's wrong, it feels wrong. My chest tightened further, my throat dry. I could feel my own desire to intervene, to pull Noah out of the bed, to demand an explanation, battling with the rational part of me screaming, don't wake them. Don't ruin this. Just stay hidden, just watch, just survive. But survival didn't come close to describing the storm of emotion inside me. I tried to focus on any logical explanation. They're both exhausted. They wrestled earlier. They're sweaty, it's heat, it's the physical exhaustion talking. They're not. They're just teenagers, it's bonding, it's platonic. But the sight of Tate's lips brushing Noah's cheek, of his weight draped across Noah's torso, and the subtle, possessive intertwining of their fingers made my rationalizations crumble almost instantly. I exhaled slowly, trying to focus, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart, but nothing helped. My gaze kept drifting to them, and each time I looked, my panic grew, my jealousy flared, and my rationalizations faltered. This was absurd, overwhelming, and almost unbearable to witness. I pressed the blanket to my chest, curling slightly into myself. They're just kids, they're just friends, it's not sexual, it can't be, but it looks like it is, and I hate it, and I don't know what to do. Minutes stretched endlessly, each one a torture. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't even look away entirely. The sight of Tate draped across Noah, the weight of his body, the softness of their interlaced fingers, the closeness of their faces, it was a private moment I was never meant to witness, and yet here I was, trapped in my own mind, watching, panicking, and somehow still unable to tear my eyes away. I heard Tate mumble something in his sleep, a soft sound that made my chest tighten. Mine. Before I could process Tate's words, Tate's right foot kicked me, sending my body tumbling off the spare room bed. My back hit the floor with a dull thud, and I groaned, trying to regain my bearings. Before I could even process it, Tate mumbled something in his sleep, a soft, possessive, unintelligible good riddance. My pulse spiked, and suddenly, before I could react, Tate shifted. My attempt to move closer or just see better was met with a firm shove. "Get out," Tate mumbled sleepily but firmly, his body pressing against Noah as if I didn't exist. Tate kicks me out of bed with his left leg again, my limbs hit the floor and my ass throbs. I froze for a moment, heart hammering, then the shove became more insistent, nudging me toward the door. My protests caught in my throat. I need to stay, I need to see if Noah's okay. But Tate's weight, his sheer physical presence, made me feel invisible. Every inch of him draped over Noah, every interlaced finger, every warm shift told me I had no place here. I stumbled backward, heart racing, clutching the blanket to my chest, and finally turned to leave. My mind spun as I shut the door behind me, leaning against it with my forehead pressed to the cool wood. I'm a third wheel, I'm an intruder, I don't belong here, this is theirs, not mine. Outside the room, I tried to catch my breath, to slow my pulse, to remind myself it was platonic. Tate was asleep, Noah was asleep, and nothing was meant to hurt me. And yet jealousy and panic twisted together in my chest so tightly it felt like it might split me in two. I've never seen two boys this close, this nude, this intertwined. And Noah is completely passive, and Tate is possessive. Why am I even here? I sank onto the floor of the hallway outside the room, curling slightly, pressing the blanket tighter around me. My mind raced in circles between panic and rationalization. It's just sleep. It's just comfort. It's not sexual, it's their dynamic. I'm supposed to leave. I'm supposed to accept that. Even as I tried to calm myself, the image of them, so intimate, so close, so oblivious, etched itself into my mind. The warmth, the weight, the intertwined fingers, the murmurs of sleep, they were theirs. And I was outside, excluded. Minutes passed like hours as I leaned against the door, listening to the soft sounds of them inside. Every sigh, every shift, every tiny movement of Tate pressing closer to Noah made my pulse jump. I felt helpless, invisible, and intensely jealous, trapped outside their private world, unable to intervene or understand, and terrified I'd never process the intensity of what I'd seen. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to focus on something else, but the image wouldn't leave my mind. I was kicked out, a third wheel to a bond I couldn't touch, and my chest ached with the unfairness of it all. I had nowhere to go but the hallway, and nowhere to look but inward, wrestling with the jealousy, confusion, and panic Tate had left me with. Noah's POV. The next evening, after Maya spent the night and she returned home, I lay rigid under the covers, every muscle tight, afraid that if I moved an inch closer I'd freeze. I kept my hands folded against my chest, a quiet, constant guard, like if I stayed perfectly still I could will my body into neutrality. Mark had once told me I was good at hiding things. God, I was too good. I didn't sleep. I counted breaths. I listened to the wind claw at the house, to the faint pop of the fire settling downstairs. When I heard Tate in the bathroom brushing his teeth, the sound sent a jolt straight through me. Ordinary noises had become warnings lately. I waited, 10 minutes, 20, an hour. He didn't come. That should have relieved me. Instead, it made my chest ache with a different kind of dread. I stared at the door, expecting the handle to turn at any second, expecting the familiar shape of him to fill the frame. Nothing. 2 hours passed like that, my body stuck halfway between exhaustion and panic. And then, suddenly, it made sense. It was 11. He wasn't coming because he wasn't waiting here. He was waiting down the hall in his room for me to walk to his bed. Waiting for the sound of my footsteps. Waiting for habit to win. Waiting for the boy who had always come to him without being asked. I pictured him sitting on the edge of his bed, listening just like I was, wondering why his best friend wasn't already there. wondering what he'd done wrong or what Maya offered that made him stay away from Tate. The realization hurt more than fear did, because for the first time I wasn't hesitating out of confusion or guilt. I was choosing not to go, and I knew with quiet certainty that when he realized that when the night passed and I didn't show up, it would change something between us forever. By one, I heard the door open, the sound pulling me out of my dreams. He crossed the room without slowing, like hesitation wasn't a concept he recognized. The bed dipped under his weight. I stayed still, counting on habit, on decency, on anything that might keep him to his side. He ignored it all. He moved closer, then closer still, until he was fully on my side. Dragging me in like distance was a mistake he was correcting. He had something to prove, that I was his, that I came first, that nothing and no one else got to take up space where he had already decided he belonged. This was his place. He'd claimed it a long time ago. He wasn't giving it up now. "Tate, please," I said. "Stop fighting and lie still," Tate muttered.